Horror. While seeming like a broad topic, it can be very simple to understand. Good horror doesn't require jump scares and an overly gory or graphic monster. Good horror boils down to a good environment and terrifying sound design. With that idea fermenting in your mind, let's explore the wonderfully twisted world of sound design and environmental horror. To start, I do want to make it clear that a well-designed monster can create horror, but it has to work well with its environment and the soundtrack, because if it doesn't, the monster just feels out of place and loses any fear it may have caused. So let's start with the easier of the topics to explain: sound design. Good sound design can take an unsettling monster and crank it up to terrifying. If you're interested in that aspect of sound design in horror, I highly suggest you watch Scruffy's video on how audio enhances horror in FNAF 1. I'll have a link to that video in the description. Anyway, sound design can be broken into two categories: diegetic and non-diegetic. Diegetic sounds are sounds created in the environment or from the area itself, like the fan from FNAF 1 or Jeremy's breathing when he has the mask on in FNAF 2. Non-diegetic is stuff from the soundtrack, not from the environment. Some examples of this include the music swell in Bendy the Ink Machine when you're crossing the pit, and Bendy's boss theme when you fight him are examples of non-diegetic sounds. A good balance of these can really add to the environment you are creating, as well as the tension you want to build. Another way that sound creates horror is when meaning or a trigger. When making the soundtrack for a game or any piece of horror, always have sounds that don't mean anything. Those sounds can create a sense of dread and unease in the individual experiencing it. FNAF 4 uses this and it works. The dog barking and the grandfather clock have no purpose other than creating a sense of dread and unease, which it does effectively because you don't know if it's linked to anything. But it is also important to have sounds that are connected to an event or a first-time playthrough. Any sound could be viewed as not having a purpose, but on a second playthrough, when people understand the reason that those sounds are happening, can also instill a sense of fear because they know what is about to happen. One good example of this in action is in Left 4 Dead 2. This 15-year-old game is a good example of this concept, since one of the major bosses of the game, the tank, has a theme song which will more often than not play before you actually see it. The original sound is decently scary, but because this game is made with Valve, it has access to the Steam Workshop. Quick little summary: the Steam Workshop is a place where you can download mods for Valve games. And those mods don't have an install process, they're just added to your game with no issue. Anyway, one cool thing that you can do with Left 4 Dead 2 is alter the soundtrack, and one of those songs is the tank theme. My friend's mod collection changes the tank theme to the sniper ear rape theme. An admittedly goofy song, with the tank being replaced by Baller. However, every time we hear the theme, we get a little freaked out since we know the tank is extremely difficult to kill and does a ton of damage. That is why sound horror doesn't just come from the fear of the unknown. It also arises from dreading what is making that sound, as long as the payoff is worth it. Now let's get to the portion of the video that everyone is aware of: environmental horror. To start off this section, I want you to imagine the most horrific monster you can think of, and place it in McDonald's play place. Not scary, right? How about we switch that play place out for a more fitting location for that monster? See how it became infinitely more terrifying? Environmental horror relies a lot on fear. Some really common fears that people have are fear of the unknown, which is commonly associated with darkness, claustrophobia, the fear of tight spaces, and agoraphobia, the fear of open spaces. Claustrophobia and agoraphobia are given to humans through evolution. Humans are very slow and very weak for our size, which means if we are spotted in the open, we would be chased down and killed, leading to our agoraphobic nature. But if we were in a tight space, we would not be strong enough to fight back, leading to our claustrophobic nature. Now, not all humans are afraid of tight or open spaces, but it's easier for humans to become fearful in those places. That's why horror environments normally focus on one of the two sides of that coin. One thing you do not want to do, though, is to be stuck in that crossroad, since you lose the value of both of the areas that are open but have cramped spaces. This is because our brain sees those places as a place to hide rather than a place of fear. So when creating a horror environment, have your spaces be either open or cramped. You never want there to be a mixture of the two, because then they lose their value. On to fear of the unknown. That concept is normally showcased through darkness. That is for a very fair reason. Darkness skews and limits our vision, which can make a friendly face look threatening or a threatening face seem friendly. This fear also has evolutionary implications as well. For example, humans are afraid of the dark because we have low visibility, while some predatory animals have great visibility, making us easy targets. Our fear of the dark can be thanks to our ancestors viewing darkness as something evil, that is, something that should be avoided. But utilizing natural human fear isn't the only thing needed to create horror. We also need an eerie environment. Now, an eerie environment, while seeming straightforward, has multiple variations. Stephen King describes these three types of scary stuff, and they work perfectly when creating a horror environment. The first is the gross out. King describes it as something disgusting, morbid, or diseased. The second is horror, which is described as unnatural, something that just feels wrong, and as if it shouldn't have happened. The third and final one is terror. King describes it as the knowledge of something or something wrong, but that event never occurs, because there was nothing there in the first place. This feeling is said to come from vagueness, where you can't tell if something is a threat or not. When creating an environment, the gross out is quite easy to create. One great example of this is the Otherworld version of Brookhaven Hospital from the Silent Hill 2 remake. In this version of the hospital, it looks moldy and rotten, as if something had infested it. That is how an environment using the gross out should be made. Horror is more difficult to create. It requires the use of an unnatural monster, and the environment is so unnatural that it creates this sense of horror. While not from a video game, the painting Relativity by M.C. Escher encapsulates this concept. The fact that no matter where you look on the painting, something feels unnatural. This exemplifies a horror environment because it presents something normal, something that we experience every day, a staircase, and contorts it to the point where it is still recognizable, it just feels unnatural. Finally, terror. That feeling that something is wrong but it never is. That feeling as if everything you know has been replaced by an exact copy. One example of this is from a lore perspective is level 18 with the backrooms. This level is a different variation for each wanderer. The area that it creates, however, is taken straight from the wanderer's childhood memories. This is the epitome of terror. The fact that this is an exact recreation of something you are familiar with, but an area where you know it shouldn't be. That can create that uneasy, uncanny feeling. Another example of how that same feeling can be created is in the Lakeview Hotel from Silent Hill 2. It's the same environment you're familiar with from navigating it before. However, after you watch one of the most important cutscenes in the game, all the monsters disappear. You're actually anxiously waiting for one of them to pop out like they had the entire game up to that point, but they never do. That is terror. Twisting a pre-established condition to make things behave differently can create environmental horror. Now, what happens if we incorporate these two concepts together? An eerie environment can only take you so far. That is where sound comes in. It can make that spooky environment feel even more alive. Subtle sounds like creaking floorboards or dripping water in a flooded environment can drastically affect the environment, making it feel more alive and real. Sometimes even altering the footsteps and interaction sounds by adding an echo can make an environment feel even more empty. Other miscellaneous sounds help as well. The sound of scratching and clawing, combined with claw and scratch marks on your environment, can help create fear towards your main monster. The little random sounds that I talked about before can be expanded upon in the environment by showing these sounds in action, which can further trick the player into thinking that those mean something. But another part of this concept is music. Music has a heavy hand in the feel of an environment. The way it sounds can increase the player's sense of panic or invoke a calm feeling in the player. However, you don't just want the music to be non-diegetic. Sometimes you can make the music have a greater impact if the source of the music can be found in the environment. Some cool examples are music boxes or other characters playing the instrument required to play the song. I get that I have made some repetitive points in this video and that I have made reference to a monster I started off by saying isn't required to make good horror. While that is true, good horror does not require a monster. It can absolutely help boost the horror of an environment in their sounds and the environment they're found in. Hello Neighbor is a prime example of this concept done poorly. Neighbor is not a threat since the environment is so poorly designed that instead of feeling lost and afraid, you feel annoyed and lost, since there's no similarities between the rooms which make it incredibly disorienting to navigate, with no payoff of being legitimately scary. Even the sound of the neighbor doesn't work because those chase sequences with the neighbor aren't scary because the music used isn't scary. It sounds more like an environment theme rather than a chase theme. Doors is the complete opposite, at least floor 1. I haven't played floor 2 yet. Its environment, while simple, is effective. It shows its purpose, and the entities play into that. Well, with rush and ambush forcing you to use the game mechanics that have already been established, as well as hide making sure you can't just cheese through those sequences. The Seek Chase perfectly exemplifies why the neighbor chase music isn't effective. That theme starts slow with a build-up as you see Seek rise from the ground before the chase starts, with an intense theme showcasing how you have to essentially run for your life. Also, Door 50 with Figure showcases that the sound choice of the neighbor chase was a bad decision, since Door 50 uses a very similar song for its area theme, and it works perfectly. The almost frantic sound over top the song helps convey the tension of the environment while not being too over the top and extra. In conclusion, good sound and environment can truly emphasize horror. Doors and Hello Neighbor, from a monster design standpoint, are not very different. Both Seek and Figure are humanoids, similar to the neighbor, and from a design standpoint are not scary. However, the music in the area where you find them adds so much tension, and the environment is designed in such a way that it adds to the horror of the monster. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.